some of you may be aware of this already. Andy Ruiz has come out in an interview and said that he knows Joshua's flaws and that Joshua's not a good boxer. Now, some people have taken that to mean that Ruiz is saying Joshua's crap. You know, he's just no good at fighting at all. When in reality, if you've seen the interview, what Ruiz is saying is that Joshua is not a good stick and move artist. Yeah? He's not a guy who's really slick on the back foot, who can keep you away and trick you and all that kind of stuff. That's what Ruiz is saying. He respects AJ's power. Obviously AJ dropped him for the first time ever in Ruiz's career, and he respects AJ's ability. But in terms of his boxing skills, he doesn't really rate him very highly. And that's fair enough because he was in there with him. Ruiz obviously has to be careful that he doesn't underestimate what AJ can actually do by way of boxing. Because even though there were warning signs in the first 2 rounds, and I'm talking about warning signs for AJ, what happened in the 3rd round is that AJ was moving around on the outside, saw an opportunity to jump in. He saw Andy Ruiz out of position. He saw a particular angle where he could enter the pocket, as Dwyer likes to call it, and let off a combination whereby he would come off better. He saw an opportunity to do that. Ruiz ended up on the canvas when he took the opportunity. Ruiz cannot underestimate that. Do you understand? He can't underestimate that. Now, when Ruiz got off the canvas and AJ went in for the finish, Ruiz caught him with a big left hook, and the rest is history, okay? But what led up to that point where Andy Ruiz ended up on the canvas? He cannot underestimate AJ's ability to replicate that. Yeah? If Andy Ruiz wants to keep hold of those titles, don't make the same mistake that AJ made. All right, of underestimating the opponent. Now, when it comes to AJ underestimating Ruiz, I don't think he underestimated Ruiz for the most part. But he did underestimate Ruiz's powers of recovery because he went flying in for the finish with no regard for what was coming back. And he was missing punches, by the way, AJ, when he went flying in for the finish. If you're missing shots like that, stop throwing, particularly when the guy is throwing punches back. At this level, don't keep throwing, man. Unless you got an iron jaw, and AJ ain't got no iron jaw. Stop throwing. You're in there against the guy who you know going into the fight, it has faster hands than you and is very good at counterpunching on the front foot, very good in exchanges. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting going into this rematch to see how AJ approaches it. Perhaps this is a way of Andy Ruiz also trying to goad AJ and try and play psychological tricks with him. Because he said he can't see any other way that AJ can fight other than getting on his bike and running around. You know, basically just stinking the place out. Now, that has to be a game plan which AJ is entertaining at this point. They have to be looking at AJ fighting in a similar way to how he did against Joseph Parker. Yeah. The concern, okay, from the AJ side of things, from what I can see, is throwing the baby out with the bathwater by way of what happened in the Andy Ruiz fight. Because in the video analysis I did of the fight on Daily Motion, where I analyzed the fight frame by frame, showing the fight actually on screen. Those of you who haven't seen it, head over to my Facebook group, Hatman Boxing, and you'll see that Daily Motion video pinned to the top of the group. And in that video, I pointed out that when AJ had his hands up, which is how Robert McCracken likes him to fight, when he had his hands up, Ruiz was more aggressive. But when he had his hands down, Ruiz was less aggressive. And the times when AJ was caught by Andy Ruiz were normally the times when he had his hands up, not when he had his hands down. When AJ was fighting with his left hand low, that is not when he was getting caught. He was getting caught when he comes on the inside with his hands up, or when he stayed still with his hands up in the middle of the ring. That's when he was getting caught. Ruiz was more aggressive when he saw AJ with his hands up. And I explained why in the video and demonstrated why in that Daily Motion video. So make sure you go check that out. Okay? In the rematch, and from the footage I've seen of AJ training, moving around, and this is recent footage in the last week or so, he's keeping his hands up as he's moving around. Now, I know it sounds counterintuitive to a lot of people. Well, yeah, he needs to keep his hands up. No, there are positives and negatives to keeping your hands up, depending on who you are as a fighter and who you're fighting, who the opponent is, what situation it is. In some instances, it's actually going to be better to fight with your left hand low. Because, for one, it splits your opponent's attention. Because when your left hand is low and you are throwing the jab, it's coming from outside of your opponent's peripheral vision. And when they've been hit with a few solid jabs in the mouth from that left hand, and you've hooked off the jab a few times, as AJ did in them first couple rounds, the opponent starts getting a little edgy, like, okay, where's that left hand at? I can't see it. He's dropped it low again. Where is it? It's coming outside his peripheral vision. He starts becoming hesitant when he can't see where that left hand is. Because he also knows you got a big right hand too. So he's watching both, right? But he doesn't know, he can't watch both at the same time because one is up and the other's down. But when you've got both your hands up, in that peekaboo style, your opponent can see where both your hands are at all times. Yeah. Now, if you're a little guy like a Mike Tyson, who bobs and weaves and stuff like that, it's not really a disadvantage to have your hands up all the time because you're constantly moving your head anyway. You're already difficult to hit because you're short and there's lots of head movement. But when you're a big guy like AJ and you're fighting a shorter guy, sometimes it's actually, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but sometimes it's actually better to have your left hand low as a way of trying to split your opponent's attention. He doesn't know which hand to focus on. He can't focus on both of them at the same time because they're not both within his view. One of them is down low by his knee and the other one's up by his chin. And if you notice in that fight, I pointed out in that fight, the times when AJ had his left hand low is the times when Andy Ruiz was least aggressive. But the times when AJ had both hands up near his face, or at least up by his chest, that's when Ruiz was more aggressive. And this is even, not just when AJ was hurt, even when he wasn't hurt. There will be moments where AJ would have both his hands up, Ruiz would jump on him. Because Ruiz can see where both his hands are now. But McCracken wants AJ to keep his hands up at all times. Another thing that keeping your hands up does is it cuts down on your own peripheral vision if you've got the earmuffs on. It can also tire you more quickly. Yeah? When you've got your left hand low, it's what I found when I was boxing. I could walk people onto the jab more easily when I had my left hand low. For one, it was a more relaxed way of throwing a jab, and it just felt more natural to me. But for two, you could raise your arm up real quick. Your opponent doesn't see it. So I was able to land the jab more often, particularly hard jabs, more often when I would throw the left hand from a low position rather than throwing it from, a raised position, like by my head. So these are the subtleties of boxing. And I'm not sure Robert McCracken sees that. It's like Ben Davison said when, he talked about AJ's loss to Ruiz. He said, I'm not sure that AJ's team know what they did wrong. And I suspect that too. I suspect that McCracken and AJ might not realize that keeping the left hand low is not what got AJ in trouble. Yeah, that's not what got him in trouble. You go watch the fight. That is not what got AJ in trouble. What got AJ in trouble was engaging Ruiz on the inside. That's what got him in trouble. And standing still, even with your hands up, standing still, not a good idea. There were several times in the fight where he stood still with his hands up and Ruiz was all over him like a cheap suit. Whereas when his left hand was down, Ruiz was more cautious about attacking because he didn't know what that left hand was going to do or where it was. You know? Anyway, we'll see whether Robert McCracken and AJ throw the baby out with the bathwater, and maybe they'll try and go overboard and change every aspect of what they did in the first fight. I'm sure. I'll be amazed if AJ comes out in the second fight with his left hand low. I'll be amazed. I think that he actually should. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but I think that he should, because he wasn't getting caught over the top of the low left hand. You go watch the fight. I've taken it apart surgically. He was not getting caught over the low left hand. Yeah? Andy Ruiz does not have a good counter right hand over the top at long range. He doesn't. So if you're at long range, you're very safe against Ruiz to fight with a low left hand. Joseph Parker fought with a low left hand against Ruiz, and he's not as tall or as rangy as AJ. It's when you come into mid and close range against Ruiz that you need to get the hand up. But at long range, you're probably better off having the hand down, in all honesty. I think it's something where you get better peripheral vision. You're able to keep better distance because you can keep pulling that jab in his face, blinding his vision. You don't have, a pulling jab, if used the right way, is actually effective. That's what a lot of people don't realize. They think that every jab has to be like Larry Holmes or George Foreman. No. Sometimes you can throw a jab out there just to blind the opponent. Yeah, to make him confused because he's constantly obscuring his vision with his pulling jab. You can actually rock him to sleep doing that, lull him into a full sense of security, then start hooking off that pulling jab. Or start throwing hard right hands down the pipe. So there are many different kinds of jabs and different ways you can use them. Some people think that unless a jab is rock solid like Larry Holmes, then there's no point in throwing it. No. That shows a limited understanding of boxing. There are times when a pulling jab is actually useful. There's times when you can actually mix up the velocity and the power of your jabs to good effect. Yeah. So we'll see what happens in this rematch, how both guys approach it. I think Andy Ruiz needs to goad AJ. I think he needs to talk a little trash and what have you and try and appeal to AJ's macho side, because that gives him a better chance of winning. If AJ just comes into the rematch all clinical, not giving a damn about stinking the place out, just looking to keep it long and not get involved, then Andy Ruiz has got his work cut out, because Ruiz does not have quick feet. At long range, yes, Ruiz had some success in the first fight with body shots and jabs and stuff like that. But most of that success occurred after AJ had been dropped. And AJ has very poor recuperative powers. That much is clear now. If you can hurt the guy, drop him, you probably got him. If you step on the gas, you got him. The huge mistake that Vladimir Klitschko made was not stepping on the gas. Yeah, but that's Klitschko. He's always been a very cautious fighter. But I can't imagine many other heavyweights will make that mistake after seeing what Andy Ruiz did to AJ. Certainly, Andy Ruiz won't. And if he sees AJ in any kind of distress or trouble in the rematch, he's going to be all over him like a harbor shark once again. So, yeah, it's going to be a very, very interesting fight. From a tactical point of view, from the location. I personally think if AJ does box a purely negative fight, he stands a good chance of winning it on points, particularly if it's in the UK. Because the crowd are not going to put pressure on AJ to entertain them. Because they know what happened the first time around. They'll be willing to accept a negative performance. Kind of like when Frank Bruno fought Oliver McCall. That was a really dull fight. It wasn't an interesting fight at all. One of the dullest fights I've ever seen Bruno involved in. But because the British public loved Bruno so much, because they'd seen what McCall had done to Lennox Lewis, because they'd seen Frank Bruno fail in several other world title attempts, they gave him a pass. You know, he got a bly in that fight against McCall in terms of not being entertaining. Just basically jab, grabbing for 12 rounds. That's what he did. And I think it'll be similar with AJ against Ruiz if the fight happens in the States, in the UK, excuse me. The British crowd, they'll let AJ box negative and they'll be happy with that. And that will take a lot of pressure off AJ's shoulders. Because in the US, I mean, it's still probably going to be a majority British crowd, but it's a different kind of atmosphere and there will be some boos. You know, there'll be a lot of Mexicans turn up if the rematch is in the US. And if AJ's stinking the place out, they'll be booing. Oh, there's going to be a lot of pressure on AJ to actually engage. You know, and that's going to put pressure on him in terms of the way they're scoring the fight too. Because in the UK, when he's moving around and, you know, staying out of trouble, jabbing, moving, the crowd will be cheering. There won't be any subconscious need for the judges to start going against AJ by way of scoring because he's being negative. Because the crowd are all cheering. But in the US, he's boxing negative. The crowd are booing. Ruiz is beckoning him on a subconscious level. That's going to go against him when it comes to the judging, in my view. Or it potentially could, at least. Yeah? So Ruiz needs to do that. Ruiz, this is really a godsend for Ruiz if AJ decides to have this fight in the US. That's a godsend. I think where the location of this rematch is going to have a bearing on who wins. From a psychological point of view, from a judging point of view, from a tactical point of view, yeah, it's going to have a big bearing. If the fight is in the US, I'll be more inclined to pick Ruiz. If the fight's in the UK, I'll be more inclined to lean towards AJ stinking the place out and winning a points decision over 12. You know. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. It's happening, I'm out. Join me on Patreon. I upload a minimum of 2 podcasts every single week, covering a wide variety of controversial topics, as well as live stream Q&A sessions. Take a look on screen right now at some of the podcasts I've produced so far. For just $3 a month, the equivalent of about £2 a month, you get access to all my new podcasts and my entire back catalogue of past podcasts, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen on your computer or on your smartphone or tablet by downloading the Patreon app from the Google Play Store or the App Store for free. The Patreon app also allows you to download each podcast in MP3. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you get access to dozens of hours of exclusive content. It's easy to sign up, there's no contract, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.